you're building this whole new protocol, you have to start with making the things work, making so you
Yeah.
don't lose money, and then once we get past all that, then we can do the, okay, now grandma can use it. Now it's really
Mm-hmm.
easy. And so, yeah, we're just, I think, just starting to get there, and we're not quite there yet.
I live unbanked off of cryptocurrency, and I use Bitrefill extensively because it lets me pay with crypto at places that don't yet accept it directly. This one service, more than any other, helps me live on crypto, pay your prepaid phone bill, or buy gift cards to thousands of major retailers around the world, all with cryptocurrency, including for exact amounts so you don't have to buy more gift credit than you need for a specific purchase. You can use Bitrefill without an account, but if you get an account, you can earn rewards points, which translate to savings, and you can also hold a balance denominated in dollars or euros to protect yourself against market crashes. Go to bitrefill.com, click Create Account, and enter the referral code DCN, or follow the link in the description. Hey everyone, I have the wonderful pleasure of speaking with the one and only Hannah Rosenberg today. How's it going?
Good, thanks.
Yeah.
It's a sunny day in San Juan, so that's always
Yeah.
lovely.
It's a sunny day here in New Hampshire too, which it's odd that they both coincide, but it's getting
Yes.
fall. I have my pumpkin colors on, although they're like,
Nice.
crypto stuff. But
Oh,
what
excellent.
why don't you just, for the viewers at home, I like to say, why don't you just tell really quick who you are, what do you do?
Okay, my name's Hannah Rosenberg. I fell in love with Bitcoin back in 2012, so I've done a wide variety of things in the space since then, but I'll just give you the current resume, which is I'm the founder and director of a business called Velis Commerce, and we help other businesses to integrate crypto. We're service providers. We're essentially a dev team, a crypto dev team. So we help a lot of people integrate crypto, Lightning. I also work at Lightning Labs, and I'm a developer advocate there. So I do developer outreach. Basically, I just try to help people to understand Lightning, especially developers, by explaining the tools and demonstrating them. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm up to these days. Yeah.
Well, cool. So I reached out to you because I knew had some kind of technical knowledge on the subject. It's not just I sort of struggled with that a little bit when I was trying to interview people on Lightning. There's a lot of there were a lot of advocates out there who were, oh, this is great and hypothetically this, but like when I had like serious questions, they weren't technical people. And then of course I ran across the wonderful Max Hillbrand, who is very knowledgeable and, basically got a good and very honest too, which is everyone's always trying to sell something and he just isn't, just very to the point about stuff. And then
Right.
basically from what you do, I kind of was like, there's a lot of questions I still have, not on the foundational levels of Lightning, like as far as how does it work, how do you balance liquidity, how do the channels work, what about security, channel closures, all that kind of back end stuff, which I assume will be back end, like fully back end eventually. It's
Yeah.
just the front end stuff, the front end stuff of, scanning invoices and what goes into the QR code reader, and just like basically the user experience thing of user tries to do thing and it fails. And why is that? So, yeah, basically you seem to be the expert, but definitely an expert in this domain. Am I correct?
Well, it's what I spend all day on. So hopefully I know a thing or two. Yeah.
Yeah. So first, let's just get into the basic ways. When you run a Lightning node yourself, you
Yeah.
have like the node address or whatever. Basically,
Mhm.
you can send to like a node can use that to connect to another node and send to another node. And first, as a little aside, does that only apply to like the full beefy node that like you're running on your computer like all the time, or does it also apply to these sort of stripped down nodes? You see stuff like Breeze and Phoenix that are running that is technically kind of its own node, but it's also not really a full one, sort of.
Right. And you can have a variety of different nodes. But no, every node on the Lightning Network will have a public key that identifies it, which is a static identifier. That one doesn't change.
Yeah.
So that applies to, any node, whether it's, a pruned node or a full node or running neutrino or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and so who can send to that and who can't?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to back up a little bit and talk about usability, sort of the user experience on Lightning. And I will agree that it's still not very user friendly. I think we're getting pretty close where there are some decent wallets out there that you can use in my husband is the head of operations at Velis. So, he sits 3 feet away from me. We do this stuff all day, and he likes to test out wallets. And he got, his dad to use, I think it was the Moon Wallet, and that one is user friendly enough that, you can just download this app and click here and then send me that thing that you copied, and then we're done and we can send each other money. So it's getting better. But, when you're building an entirely new protocol, Lightning is maybe 4 years old. Like it's, it's really, really new. So when you're building this whole new protocol, you have to start with making the things work, you don't lose money, and then once we get past all that, then we can do now grandma can use it. Now it's really easy. And so, we're I think just starting to get there, and we're not quite there yet. But as far as it, when you are thinking about the mechanics of how this works, you have to have some sort of node. If it's non-custodial, then you have to be running your own node, or at least be managing the keys to maybe a node that you're paying someone to host elsewhere. And then if it's custodial, there's all kinds of wallets you can use, and someone else is managing that for you. And then you have to have it's another couple of steps on top of Bitcoin, right? You have to, put some money into, that node, and then open channels with people. And then you have to manage liquidity, which we can get into if you like, but that's a complicated topic. And I think, 5 years from now, this will all be abstracted away, where there's, just an app and you push a couple of settings, and that it takes care of that in the background. But we're not there yet. So at the moment, if you're running a Lightning node, you still have to be familiar with, okay, I funded it. Now I'm going to set up a channel. I have outgoing liquidity. I can pay people. If I want people to pay me, I have to acquire inbound liquidity. And, you have to concern yourself with those things. But the basics of it is, yes, everyone's got a node in one capacity or another. And all the nodes have a public key which identifies them, and that is their static identifier. And if you want to send funds to someone, that's the most important bit of information, is having that public key. And there's lots of other information and invoices and stuff, but as long as you've got that public key, generally you can get some funds to them.
Yeah. And so I have experienced through, I can't remember if it was Phoenix or Breeze. I haven't gone onto the Moon Wallet yet because I wasn't really around when I was, it must be really new because I wasn't really around when I was poking around earlier in the year. And
I can't even keep up with what's out there, but they're getting better as we go, yes.
Yes. And so I don't think either of the stripped down mobile nodes could send straight to the public key of my full node that I have running over here. And, I mean, I'm sure on the base, like in the back end, yes, of course, that's literally how you send money probably, but it's just the front end just needs more than that. They wanted like an invoice or something. So first off, like why would you not be able to send straight to like the, what one could call like the universal source of truth as far as the node, right? The base public key. Why would some wallets disable that? And yeah, basically why would they do that? And then is that common?
Yes. So we are talking about is a Bolt 11 invoice, which is the current standard for how to send payments. And pretty much every wallet out there is going to enable that. And then anything that you want to do that's different from that, like key send payments, the spontaneous payments, that type of thing, is outside Bolt 11, and not everything's going to support it. But to talk about why this is, you have to get a little bit technical. And do you think your viewers are already familiar with how Lightning works, or should we cover that a little bit?
If they watch my other videos, which I'll just link down below so you guys can see. But okay. Yeah, I broke it down pretty, in the general sense for sure. Okay,
but the basic idea is on the Lightning Network, we're dealing with Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
real Bitcoin transactions, but it's like signing a check and
Mm-hmm.
handing it to someone, but they don't take it to the bank. And so we just hand these little checks all around to each other, and we can do this and not worry about someone stealing our money, because should anything ever go wrong, we can take that check to the bank, essentially, right? We can go
Mm-hmm.
settle on the Bitcoin blockchain. So everything that you do in Lightning has to be set up such that you can go and settle if there's any dispute, if any, not even if someone tries to steal your money, if someone just, their node
They go
catches on
offline.
fire and they go offline. Right. Yeah, whatever the case may be. So in this whole process, in the process of routing payments, which you're going
Mm-hmm.
to be doing the vast majority of the time because it doesn't make sense to open a direct channel with everyone, you have this thing called a pre-image. And a
Mm-hmm.
pre-image is just a random number, but it's a secret,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so many of these payments, it all depends on how the pre-image is handled. You know, so when a standard Bolt 11 invoice, if I'm paying you, I would say, hey, I want to send you some money. Can you send me an invoice? And you create the secret number, the pre-image,
Mm-hmm.
you hash it so I can't see what it is. You bake it into the invoice and send it to me. And that secret gets baked into the whole path between me and you,
Mm.
which is part of how we ensure that people are incentivized to send that, and then can't run off with the money. It gets a bit tricky, but then you get your money and then you pass the secret all the way back down the chain and everyone settles and we're done. Right? I should say all the way back down the path. Let's not
Yeah,
confuse the terminology.
of
Yeah.
course.
And so with the Bolt 11 invoice, you generate the pre-image when you create the invoice. And then my Bolt 11 wallet,
Mm-hmm.
goes and scans that QR code. Then it has the hash of the pre-image and it constructs the whole transaction and finds a route to you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it needs to happen that way. You need to create the invoice and give it to me because of how that secret is managed, which
Mm-hmm.
prevents you from running off with the money, or prevents any of the intermediaries in the path from running off with the money. So that is the standard payment mechanism. It's, Bolt 11 is the standard. And that's why you have to show me an invoice. You have to
Mm-hmm.
come up with the secret number. Um,
Yeah, so basically, if you were going to try to just send straight to the public key over just directly without that, there would be a lot of, I guess, room for trickery or things getting not done, like things not turning out well. It's just a more secure way of doing things.
Kind of. That's the original setup. Now there is, like we touched on briefly, KeySend,
Mm-hmm.
and these sort of spontaneous payments. And this is outside of Bolt 11, the Bolt 11 setup. So you can only do this with wallets that specifically enable it. And
Mm-hmm.
most of them won't generally because it's a bit outside the norm. And the idea there is that you say, okay, if your wallet enables KeySend and mine does too, then if I have just your public key, then I can construct the payment and I
Mm-hmm.
create the pre-image, and then I can send it through to you. And it's a bit complicated, but that way still works, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
still secure, as in none of the intermediaries are going to be able to run off with our money, and the
Yeah.
incentive structure still works. But that's much less common, much less tested, and so a lot of wallets still don't enable that. So
Hmm.
it's a ways off. But it's very useful technology, especially when it comes to AMP payments, atomic multipath payments. They use sort of that structure, and it's core to how that works. So I think we'll see that it'll become more and more common because it enables quite a lot of functionality when you have that flexibility.
Yeah. It's so we're talking about the invoices, and it's pretty easy to, understand invoices from like an old school fiat type perspective, like your little thing here, did it work out? That's pretty easy. And then it's the same thing with, let's just say, on-chain stuff where you get a new address every time, and it just if it is, you can sometimes specify the amount in it and stuff, but even if people send a different amount or whatever, you can still see in that address how much you got, and it's kind of simple like that. So now the thing about I've experienced this a couple times, and I can't remember the exact specific, but the one of the things that got me that prompted me to even reach out on this stuff was I was watching a gentleman named Mark Falzon in El Salvador trying to go spend stuff on the Bitcoin beach, and coming from like a super, which, this is, I'm not saying this is an insult to him at all. I think it's the strength of what he's trying to do. He's coming from a super noob perspective, like just doesn't know anything. And I think he's pretty new to crypto, especially Lightning. And he's just trying to scan this thing. Oh, like I don't have a strike. Well, I'm going to use this, and it doesn't work. And I did recognize it was one of those things where I think it wanted an amount in the invoice and it didn't have one. It didn't work. It was one of those little compatibility issues. And he's just like, no, it doesn't work. You can't use Lightning here. And I'm like, you can. You just use the wrong wallet because never mind. It was like one of those kinds of things. So in my own life, I've experienced this where I've tried to send, invoices or whatever. I've also, when I'm like just routing funds from the node to like the mobile wallets and stuff just to test things out, or, rebalance liquidity or whatever, I've had that where, you have to send, like, some of them will only take invoices with an amount, and some wallets don't need an amount to the invoice. You can just scan it and then you specify the amount. So why, like, in the case of the, let's just say, on-chain example where you have a QR code, you scan it and it puts in the address and the amount, if you don't have that in your wallet or it doesn't work or whatever, you can still send to that same thing. So basically, why is there an amount specification requirement sometimes, but not other times?
Okay, so it depends on what particular payment protocol you're using. But Lightning is different from on-chain. From on-chain, you kind of just have this, giant ledger, giant shared ledger, and you're just saying, hey, you have, the sender really has all the control in that situation. They're just saying, these are my funds. I'm now declaring that they belong to this address over here, right? You don't need anyone interacting with you to do that. If you can broadcast it to the network, you're done. That's all. You can create a valid transaction and broadcast it to the network, then you're done. With Lightning, it requires a lot more interaction, right? The parties have to be online. All the intermediaries have to be online. They have to forward things and confirm things. There's, a lot more interaction going on, which is why you have to have the same protocols happening. So, and let's get into, you wanted to talk a bit about LNURL, which is cool. And that might have been what was happening here. I don't know the specifics, but it's possible that could have been what was going on here that created this. So again, Bolt 11 works pretty well, but every time you step out of that, you have to have, basically all wallets are going to enable that. And then anything extra, you have to have a wallet that, allows for that extra feature. And LNURL is really cool because it will sort of allow you, that's one of the situations, some of the functionality there is that you can enter the payment amount and then send it. But what's interesting about LNURL is that actually it's not directly in the Lightning Network at all, right? This is just a protocol for communication that doesn't directly use Lightning in any way. You could use this protocol for all kinds of things. So basically, it's just a way to encode an address, a URL, right? And then you can go, and if someone wants a Lightning payment, they can have their node running, and then they can have sort of this server running on top of it that's waiting for these, requests to come in. And basically, all you do with LNURL, it's a simplification, but it's just a URL, and your wallet goes and visits that URL. And the person's node on the other side that's running that service says, oh, hey, we got a request. Do you want to send us some money? We accept donations between this amount and this amount. And then your wallet sees that because it's speaking that same language, has the same protocol enabled. And then you say, okay, I'm going to send $10. Boom. And then it goes back and says, we'd like to send $10. And then that node creates that invoice for $10 and then sends it to your wallet. So it's kind of outside, like next to the Lightning Network, just a way to communicate to get your wallets talking to then send the correct invoice.
So you said it's not on the Lightning Network itself, and to ask like the noob question to end all noob questions, well then where is it?
The internet. So it's like a regular internet service. Any API you might visit on the internet. It's basically using just HTTP
Mm.
that stuff. So it's a very boring standard internet protocol and way to do it. It's just specific encoding
Hmm.
that some wallets will enable so that they recognize those type of requests and can handle them.
Yeah, and so is this starting to become more standard, or is that kind of the hope that this becomes like as much as I know Bitcoiners don't like to make anything like one way of doing things. It has to be a million, but like to make it like the standard that like everyone's going to be transacting on Lightning through LN URLs. Like every wallet, that's how you're going to connect. Is it going to be standard? Is that kind of the hope?
I think there's so much going on in the space.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see a big push in that direction, but I think there are lots of people that are using it and implementing it.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's not a very hefty protocol, right? It isn't. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a little bit of encoding and recognizing a little bit of stuff. I think it will be fairly well used because it's very flexible and very handy, and it's not terribly tricky or difficult. So I see it being pretty common. Yeah.
Yeah, and so now we hit. So we're trying to make the back end work just fine. All right, that's coming along great. Now we're finally in an age when there's like front end users who are actually like end users are actually using this stuff, and talking about all the different ways and that people basically these nodes can communicate with each other, and basically when you pare it down to the base end user human, and a lot of crypto people are in this boat too, not just super non-technical non-crypto users. That's a whole other kettle of fish, as they say. But like when basically what most people would expect is, okay, so I got my wallet, blah blah blah. Okay, how do I send you money? And then just either give the address or give the QR code to scan, whatever thing. You go boom, you put that in and hit send, and it should work. And when it doesn't work, which there's back end issues such as routing and liquidity and stuff, but that's a different conversation. When it just you scan it, it says error not recognized or something, or like must have amount and invoice, or it doesn't support things. That's just like a dead. It doesn't work. The whole technology's screwed. The internet might as well be a joke. Like it just that's where people hit like immediately. It just like does it work? It's a very binary flowchart. Does it work? If yes, then awesome. If no, then scam. It's just that's where it goes. And as much as
Yes.
that's a simplistic way of thinking, that is, I guess I like to say the free market's always right. Like the end user, the customer's always right. It's on the business to solve that problem, not argue with the customer why they're wrong to have that opinion. So basically, what do you see happening or is happening to make it so that most wallets or all wallets basically, or just the ones that people will be using, uh, don't ever have that didn't work experience from just the address compatibility kind of issue?
Well, my developer brain goes instantly to there's a serious lack of good error codes in there, right? Like it
Mm-hmm.
should be a lot more specific. If it's,
Mm-hmm.
if that QR code was using LN URL, then that error code should say this wallet doesn't support LN URL.
Mm-hmm.
Request an invoice, a Bolt 11 invoice to complete payment.
Mm-hmm.
Like you should have much clearer instructions for someone rather than just failed. And I think instructions that give some sort of guidance, like this is the protocol. We recognize this is this protocol. We don't currently support that. Please request this.
Mm-hmm.
That would be an obvious first one. But I think this is just kind of a matter of time, right? As these things
Mm.
get better, as we get a lot more people using them, we'll get better and better libraries that handle all these things, and that you can just plug into these wallets, and you'll see less and less of these errors. Yeah,
Mm.
but I think that's it's just it's time. It's an ambitious project, to try
Yeah,
and
naturally.
onboard millions of people onto the Lightning Network and make a smooth user experience on a technology that has only existed for like 4 years. So,
Yeah. So basically, the hope is in the future, more wallets will just support more of these things. And then no matter what you scan, that's in common use, of course, maybe some things will be deprecated over time, but like whatever you scan in your day to day life will just work. And that's just
Yes.
kind of wallets enabling these kinds of things. Now,
Yeah. Or, especially with the liquidity issues, I think that, I mean, some of those issues you have to avoid up front, but I think with the
yeah,
onboarding, I'm optimistic as well that we'll be able to onboard users in such a way that they're not going to instantly run into liquidity issues and all that type of stuff. But
yeah,
it's
for
more
sure.
complex than Bitcoin main chain, definitely. So there's a lot more things to account for.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's a that's one thing that like I've been trying to manage on my own because uh, having a well-connected node and like routing a payment and stuff has always been a little bit of a challenge to have consistently. So I've like jumped into a liquidity triangle to try to help that out. And still, it's like if I try to send something, I usually, sometimes I have to rely on a different wallet. That's why I use, a bunch of different wallets in addition to the full node, and just, play around and see what works. And, hopefully that kind of stuff gets abstracted someday. But let me get hit on some point that the crypto world as a whole, this isn't like Lightning specific necessarily, right? Because the crypto world as a whole, I mean, crypto largely works, right? It's largely, starting with Bitcoin and then everything else, barring some big crazy circumstances, it largely just, it works at back end. And the
Yeah.
things that it hasn't really worked on yet because it hasn't provided, it's kind of a cold, cruel, dark place of no social interaction with the actual protocol itself, where it's like, because I've been using crypto for 8 years. I've been living off crypto entirely for 6 years. Like I've been in this forever. I've sent and received stuff forever, and it's always like Signal message me an address, and so that part is just like and I've jumped into the username space a little bit as well because there's a whole bunch of different username schemes out there, and they're all very, I guess, crude at this point to where no one would really use them, kind of thing. And so, basically, what can you see on the horizon, or what is possible with Lightning as far as something put on top of it that has like an easy, like a maybe a human readable username kind of thing that can help transmit messages and stuff like that in a way that's basically has like a Venmo type experience, but also doesn't, compromise decentralization. It's not like you're just trusting Strike to run all your stuff. And even though it's Lightning backend, it's still Strike has all the other data, like who you send it to, not just some, address or something.
Yes. Okay, well, we get to maybe dive down one of my favorite lightning rabbit holes here. Are you familiar with
Hmm.
the concept of a Web3?
Yes, basically. Not
Okay.
super intimately, but yes.
So it roughly Web 1 is like, the old school, 90s web page. We just go there, you read it and you're done. That's your web experience, right?
Hmm.
Web 2.0 is, like social media, Facebook, where you are creating content and really interacting with people. And then Web 3, people use that term in lots of different ways to mean a number of different things, but it kind of means where the user has control over their identity and their data,
Hmm.
kind of flipping that element of control there. And a lot of times in the crypto space, when we think of Web3, we tend to think of Ethereum, and these other sort of platforms, smart contract platforms, and projects like Uport and self-sovereign identity and this sort of stuff. But one of my favorite things about Lightning that, I was very interested in it just because it's scalable, cheap payments. I was very
Hmm.
focused on payments, and then I realized, oh, all this other awesome stuff that's coming out of this is that there's a lot of Web3 type stuff that you can do on Lightning. One of them
Hmm.
being around identity, right, and
Okay.
identifying yourself. And this is largely because, one, because a node has a persistent identity, right? So you can leverage that. We can talk a bit about LSATs and that type of stuff.
Hmm.
But there's so many different ways to manage identity or to use the tools that Lightning already has in place, such as you're connected to peers, you have the static identity, you also have, an HD wallet, so a wallet full
Hmm.
of keys that you can use to create, more ephemeral identities, short-term identities to use some of these keys. So there's really, we could, spend an hour talking about just that. But so to come back to your original question of like the namespace stuff and how you identify people, I'm not really sure, but it wouldn't, I think we'll definitely see a future where, I think it's very likely we'll see a future where Lightning nodes are used in identification, and those keys are used for that, for identifying yourself on services, and for, I hope, replacing login with Google, login with Lightning. That would be amazing, right? And so I don't know how that would work on from a user experience, right? Would this be a part of the protocol? Would your Lightning node alias be, your name, and that's how people find you? Like, I don't know. But I know that the base layer for doing all of that stuff is very much there on Lightning. So it could be really interesting. You should go build that. That'd be a killer app.
That'd be fun. Now, when we're talking about like L1, is any of this possible on chain? I mean, obviously, let's forget scaling for a second, but is any of this possible on just like base layer? And if so, why hasn't it cropped up? Why hasn't it really happened as far as like the namespace on just like on chain? Like, what's the big difference why you'd hope that this would be happening on Lightning as like identifiers or things like that, whereas not really on the main chain?
So scaling is a big issue there. Projects like, if you try and think of doing some sort of service to log into a website, something like Uport, the Uport is a clever thing with IPFS, doesn't exactly have this problem. But you'd say, okay, every time I'm going to log into a website, I'm going to make some sort of transaction with this token on Ethereum or whatever it is. Then imagine paying a whole bunch of gas every time you tried to log into a website, like you instantly go, oh no, this is not going to work, Yeah,
I had Uniswap sticker shock yesterday. I'm like, oof.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna check back in 6 months.
Yes. Yeah, it can get intense. So it's a real problem there, and Lightning doesn't have that problem. But other issues with main chain, I think, the really, and I talk to people a lot about different crypto use cases, and what's so important to, some people when they're looking to use crypto, we always ask people like, what do you want to do? Like, what are you chasing? What functionality are you looking for? And a lot of times, if it's immutability that they're looking for, if it's transparency and auditability and immutability, then you definitely want the main chain, right? So if you're looking to record when someone accessed something or all the different things that they did, you definitely want main chain. If you're looking for privacy, or or ephemeral sort of data, like you definitely want Lightning. But thinking of Bitcoin specifically, I think so much has gone into setting it up so you can not have to reuse addresses to try and make it much more private. That's where then the momentum is, and all the different HD wallets and stuff, all the stuff that we're coming up with have been designed with more and more privacy. And when you're talking about identity, you actually kind of want the opposite. You want like a static, identifier.
But you also want privacy, and that's the thing.
You also want privacy. And so you want really, with the whole Web3 concept, you want the user to be able to make that choice, right? Do I want to give someone my static identity, or do I want to use, an ephemeral key to log into here? And you want to give, put that decision making on the user so they have control over whether or not they give you their real identity or their more persistent identity or a temporary one. And I think Lightning offers a lot of flexibility there, without the gas fees of other options. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that I've kind of heard about lately is, people talk about Sphinx chat and things like that. And like, there's people who are basically looking at Lightning from a data perspective and not from a purely transactional perspective, and that stuff's always uh, been interesting to me. It is always funny where you see like the opposite end of the same side of the coin, whereas like I have a bunch of friends and contacts in the BSV world, and they're doing a lot of like almost like the money use case seems to be very far in the background. It's almost all data, like data applications and things, and it's all on chain, which seems to me like it doesn't make very much sense at all to be like putting giant files and stuff in like a block, literally. And it's kind of it's interesting how like that stuff is working out. It's also interesting how projects like Ethereum have been the poster child for that kind of Web3 thing. Yet because of the way things are done, it's just like horrendously like not usable. Like for example, if I had a .eth username, in order to just register that, it would be a lot of money and a lot of time to just like go through that. And it's like, whoa, maybe something would work out well. But that does bring up the fee part of scaling, does bring up kind of an important part, right? So with Lightning, of course, like that's the thing that I've noticed about everything, right, is that they're, like what is it, the Sith deal in absolutes kind of thing. It's not like this works and this doesn't. It's always a very complex proposition of balancing things in a lot of ways. And so like wherever there's scarcity, because there is scarcity in the world, and wherever there's demand, that will set prices and stuff. That always works out like that. And so obviously, Lightning is a more efficient way of scaling things than pure on-chain for Bitcoin, at least the way it's standing today. Now, first off, what is the long-term prospect for fees for Lightning? And that's a two-part question. One of them is obviously everything's kind of cheap right now sort of thing, but I've also seen people spend like 4, 5, 6 cents on a Lightning transaction before. And it's like basic. So first off, what's the long-term outlook for fees and how they would evolve on Lightning for payments? And then second is if we start doing a lot of this, Web3 kind of stuff, how does that impact the fee landscape of Lightning? Either how does that spill over into the payment side of things, kind of like what happened with Ethereum on chain, or wouldn't, or how is that different from just how does that offer a different set of considerations?
Okay, so I
Complicated
love this question.
Sorry.
No, I love this, and this brings me back to, I want to start with some sort of basics of scaling, because when we think about scaling, we tend to think of the obvious pain point that we see, which is like gas fees on Ethereum, or Bitcoin transaction fees going up to $30 or something. Like, oh, that's painful. So that's what we see. So that tends to be what we fixate on. But back when we were having these debates over big blocks versus second layers and all this stuff, and I went through it and kind of looked at it, and the reason I sort of decided that second layer was the technical solution that I was going to support and work on. It's not just about fees. It's about fees on the network. It's about just transmitting all of that data through the whole network, and then it's about blockchain bloat. And having to, here's the thing: is if you make a comparison between I go out and I buy a cup of green tea at a cafe. If I use my Visa card to do that, that location knows about it. Their bank knows about it. My bank in Chicago knows about it. Some sort of intermediary bank somewhere along the path, in New York or something might know about it. It's like 5 entities maybe that are going to know about it, right? But in contrast, if I bought that cup of tea using Bitcoin on the main chain, 10,000 nodes at least around the world would have to see that transaction, validate it, and then hold on to it forever, right? So there's this problem of everyone has to know about everything. So just coordinating all that data and then holding on to all of that data. And if it's some really, cool application where you want immutability, you're recording, a property deed or something, you want that to exist forever. If it's just me buying a cup of tea at, 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, right? Like no one gives a shite. Like that should not be in the blockchain forever. Like that's not, I think of it as space in a public blockchain is a scarce resource, and it
Mm-hmm.
should be expensive, and my cup of tea is not valuable enough to be in there, right? It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
make sense for everyone to hold on to that
Of
forever.
course.
So this is, for all of these reasons, is why I really like Lightning, because with Lightning, you again, you say, why can Visa scale so much better than Bitcoin on chain,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's because you can have local knowledge, right? Maybe just those 5 entities need to know about what's going on. And of course, they don't have to do mining and all that stuff, but just those 5 entities. So you can have this much more local knowledge. And that's what's so awesome about Lightning, is you can also have just that local knowledge. So when you're talking about, like, okay, if we get a lot more people onto Lightning, are we going to see an increase in fees? And the answer in general is no. Now, of course, it's really complex. And I
Mm-hmm.
met a woman over the summer that was just like PhD, just like studying this stuff and modeling it.
Yeah,
And it's
of
like,
course.
it's complicated. So big disclaimer, but short
Mm-hmm.
answer is no, because I could just set up a channel, like you and me could set up a channel with each other. And
Mm-hmm.
you, me, and your cousin or something could all set up, have our own little Lightning network, our own little corner of the
Yeah.
Lightning network, and just exchange. And no one else needs to know about that. And so what's happening on the other side of the network is entirely immaterial to us. It doesn't matter at
Mm-hmm.
all. And if there's a million users in, a city, 100 miles away, that are all making all kinds of transactions, that does not impact what we're doing in any fashion. We don't need to know about it. Our nodes don't need to know about it. We don't even know it exists. So there's
Mm.
no reason it has to impact what we're doing. So the short answer is no, I don't think it will impact it at all. There might be, you have to look at competition
Mm-hmm.
between different routes. Maybe if there's some particular service or one node that you have to go through for one reason or another, then maybe you'd get some sort of competition going on there.
Mm-hmm.
So there are caveats here, where there's certain situations where you might wind up with fee pressure here or there. But in general, because you have local knowledge, it's not going to function at all like main chain, where more
Yeah.
users on the network, for may or may not have any bearing on what I'm doing. Yeah.
Now, on the other side of things, right? When you want to, we're talking about the trade off. Obviously, the trade off with everything is, on chain puts everything out there for the entire world to see. It's verifiable by the whole world. That's kind of the entire point of it, which is, it's awesome. The problem is just when you want to like set up a Twitter, and every single tweet you ever make, the entire world gets to see that without even wanting to necessarily see that. Like they don't have to be, following you to receive all that. And so, yeah,
Right.
obviously there's trade-offs. Now, do you think there's any cases where it might start to become complex from just the data perspective, where not every there's just a lot of data that is more locally shared in these local networks, these low corners of the network, as it were, and it's hard kind of finding a universal source of truth across the whole network, like on the state of something. Like let's just say, you know, let's just say, for argument's sake, it's like the Trump Twitter, right? He's one dude who had the most valuable like Twitter out there, because it wasn't just he's followed and controversial, but during his reign, as it were, it's like the world lived and died by that kind of thing. It was just like it was almost, you kind of almost want his Twitter to be on chain, because then the entire world can see the state of Trump, as it were, today, bit by bit, like that. But then, like, basically, yeah, is there a case where that becomes more complicated for the entire, I would say disjointed is maybe not the right word, but the entire scattered around network starts having scaling issues reconciling a one single source of truth?
So in the Lightning Network, the single source of truth sort of is the Bitcoin blockchain. And then if there's any sort of dispute about what is the truth, we go and settle it on the Bitcoin blockchain. Um, and and then you come up again, we're talking about immutability, right? If we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about Trump on Twitter and we're saying this, we should record this, you're saying we want it to be immutable, which then means if it somehow this existed on Lightning, you would want a way to record that specific Twitter feed on the main chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or in some sort of much more IPFS or whatever it is, some sort of much more permanent data store. So I think In an ideal world, what you want are options, right? If, I don't want, if, we find a way to move something like Twitter onto a network like Lightning,
Hmm.
I don't want to see every tweet that comes out there. I don't want to see most tweets out there, not pretty most of them,
Yeah,
right?
of course. It's very
So,
obvious.
yeah, so I
Mm.
only want to subscribe to a very, very limited set of data. But
Hmm.
then, if you'd say there's something we do want to record, to then have that option. So if maybe I decide it's important to me, I think this particular person here, what they're tweeting has historic value for better or for worse, right? And I think it should be recorded. If I think that's valuable, then maybe I could pay to embed that in the main chain. And
Mm.
you could see a scenario like that where that might make some sense, where someone has to be willing to pay to embed it. So it has to be, not my Tuesday morning cup of green tea. It has to be something of a bit more
Yeah.
importance than that.
Like maybe an annual Twitter backup goes on chain for you. If you really want that, you're
Yeah,
going to pay
and
like an
you could
extra
use a
20
Merkle
bucks.
tree, right? And then
Yeah.
just embed the
Hmm.
root of the Merkle tree. You could do all kinds of cool stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, just a last sort of, I guess, scaling question on the data thing, which is, it's less hypothetical. So when you're sending data, obviously one of the, I would say, less understood things about Lightning is one of the bigger things that people have to deal with is liquidity,
Yes.
specifically specific liquidity, right? Liquidity through a route. And of course, when you're sending money, you need to have enough money to send the money. But now, does that affect data at all? Like, so let's just say I got, you know, 200,000 sats in a channel, 200,000 Satoshis in a channel somewhere. Obviously, I can send and receive that. But when I'm doing data, is it just basically the only thing I have to send is like the fees? Or does it have a liquidity based scaling consideration when you're just doing data?
Okay, so you're talking about the idea of embedding data in a Lightning transaction, kind of
Yes.
like Sphinx Chat or these sorts of protocols
Mm-hmm.
kind of can do that
Yeah.
sometimes. Um, so it would basically probably that data would be encrypted, and wrapped in the
Mm-hmm.
onion routing. And so from the perspective of a node that's just routing it, they might not even realize, that there's any sort of data embedded in there. They
Mm-hmm.
just might see here's this transaction coming through, and the fee on this is acceptable to me, so I'm going to forward it, right?
Mm.
And so probably they wouldn't even know. And so then the question just comes back to you, is that data worth the fees you're going to have to pay to send it along this network? Which
Mm.
generally, Lightning Network is pretty small, so maybe so, right? But then I think that's much more of a question for the user: is that a valuable use of your satoshis or not? But the network in general, I don't think would know the difference. They would have no idea if you're sending, um, like what it is exactly that's going through there.
Yeah.
So,
And so while you
okay.
don't necessarily know if you're routing a bunch of one sat transactions that are paying a much higher fee than one sat, then you're guessing that they're probably data and not payments.
Yeah, or you could do like, yes, probably so,
Mm-hmm.
right? You might be able to infer that. But,
Mm-hmm.
from the perspective of that node, it's just like, here are these transactions coming through. Do they have an acceptable fee? Okay, on you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I guess like opens up another question, which is what are the limitations of data that can be included in a Lightning transaction? Because as it's a completely different infrastructure, I kind of know, there's a certain data limit on an on-chain transaction, and you can put in data in there through opcodes and such. And then some chains have really changed the limit of like what you can put in, but it's still like data that goes through, and there you go. Is it a similar kind of thing on Lightning, or is it a different? Basically, what all can be included in that? Put one sat here to this person kind of conversation.
Yeah, I don't have that specific data. I'm gonna have to go Google it now after this, so I
Mm-hmm.
can tell you exactly how many characters, but I
Uh
don't know
huh.
off the top of my head. But there's a lot more flexibility. But
Mm-hmm.
the limit there is might going is going to be sort of, the size of the transaction, right? So, that can only have sort of 20 hops, and, so there is definitely a limit on how big you want that whole data packet to be as you're sending it through. But I don't have the exact character limit for you. Bigger than the Bitcoin blockchain, obviously, but I can go dig that up.
And so if you run into the limit, then what you do is you'd send like 10 in a row of like pieces of the entire piece of data you'd want to put in, just like beep, beep, beep,
And
beep,
you can
beep.
do multi-path payments, or you can also just, send some sort of hash of the data, or send, the data out of bound and send a payment for it through the Lightning Network.
Yeah.
Like there's a variety of different ways to handle that. Yeah.
Okay, so now sort of freebie questions that were, what's the thing that's brewing up in the Lightning space that you're most excited about? Like, what's a thing that's either being worked on now or is already out there now? Or maybe it's just not, maybe just like a thought in someone's mind, but someone says this should be possible. And then what's just the thing that's like the most mind blowing that just gets you up in the morning whenever you're like, having conversation and like a drink or two, and you're like, oh, you know what, this really cool thing is, that kind of thing. What's that for you?
Yes. LSATs. That would probably be the number one thing for me at the moment. You go through phases, but
Yeah.
But LSATs is this idea of, you can do authentication, and basically LND specifically uses cookies, but they use something called macaroons, which is like a very fancy cookie. And so it's really cool, and it's structured, and it's signed data. It's kind of like slightly analogous to JSON web tokens, but anyhow, it's cool stuff. And you can basically buy these on the Lightning Network, and have them, they're very flexible, and so you basically can authenticate yourself and then buy access to different services, or even transfer access. Like, here's an access token for this API, and I can transfer it, and all this sort of stuff. And I think that that's just a really cool, really interesting protocol that has the potential to just, blossom into like whole industries. And so that's something that I like to have a couple glasses of wine and ramble on and on about, where all my friends are just like, okay, Hannah.
Yeah, they get it. All right, well, this has been pretty great. Where can people find more about what you do or follow you personally, and where can they get more?
I'd say Twitter is where I think I'm at H Michelle Rose on Twitter. That's where I talk about a lot of crypto stuff. My business's website is velascommerce.com. We have
And
a whole
how's that
bunch
spelled?
of resources. VELAS, commerce.com. I make videos for Lightning Labs. So especially if, someone out there is technically savvy and wants to play with some of these tools, I highly recommend, docs.lightning.engineering or the Lightning Labs YouTube channel. It's a ton of resources there.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Well, thanks very much for being on, and I'll see you guys next week.
All right. Excellent.